Television was supposed to be a place where the worst of human nature stayed on the other side of the screen, something to watch from a safe distance, a way to see the world without being touched by it. But the people in these cases understood something about cameras that most people never think about. A camera cannot tell the difference between a person performing grief and a person feeling it. A camera cannot see what happened the night before. A camera records what it is shown, and every single person on this list understood exactly what they wanted to show. Some of them ended up on television by accident. Some went looking for it. Some sat down with journalists and looked directly into the lens and said the words of an innocent person, while the evidence of what they had done was still being collected. And one used a phone call as a weapon, while the world watched him grieve the very next day. Today, we are covering the 7 levels of killers who went on live television. Level 1. The accidental exposure. John Cooper, the bullseye killer whose game show appearance caught him, 22 years later. John William Cooper was born on September 3, 1944, in Milford Haven, a small port town on the southwestern tip of Wales, in a county called Pembrokeshire. He grew up there, worked there, married there, and raised his children there. He knew every road, every footpath, every stretch of coastline, every farm set back from the hedgerows. He spent his free time outdoors. He fished. He was a keen scuba diver along the coastal waters he had known his whole life. To the people of Milford Haven who saw him regularly, he came across as a friendly, ordinary man. Likeable, even. That was the face he showed the world. Behind that face was something else entirely. His son Andrew, who gave evidence against his father at trial, later described what growing up in the Cooper household was actually like. He said his father beat him regularly for minor things. He described an occasion when he was 11 years old, out fishing with his father, when Cooper hit him in the face, pushed him to the floor, pointed a loaded shotgun at him, and told him he was worthless and that his family did not want him. He pulled the trigger. The gun was empty. Andrew Cooper has said he has 12 screws holding his spine in place from the violence his father inflicted on him throughout his childhood. Patricia, Cooper's wife, stayed in the marriage and had no knowledge of what her husband was doing outside their home. In 1966, Cooper married Patricia and they had 2 children together. In 1978, he won a new car and £90,000 in a competition. He used the money to set up a small farm. The money did not last. Cooper had a gambling habit and made poor financial decisions, and the money disappeared. After that, he began stealing. He was already a man with a history of minor offences from his younger years, including stealing a car and assaulting a police officer. Now he turned to burglary in a more serious way. He was good at it. He knew the area. He knew which properties were set back from the road, which ones belonged to people who lived alone, which ones were worth the risk. Over the years, he committed at least 30 burglaries and robberies across Pembrokeshire. He knew how to get in and get out. He knew how to avoid being seen, and for a long time he managed it. What he could not manage was what happened when he was disturbed. On December 22, 1985, 3 days before Christmas, Cooper broke into a large 3-story farmhouse at Scoveston Park, near Milford Haven. The property belonged to a brother and sister named Richard Thomas, who was 58, and Helen Thomas, who was 54. Cooper likely believed Helen was alone in the house. He was in the middle of robbing the property when Richard came home. The moment Richard walked in, the situation changed. Cooper shot Richard in the stomach and in the head. Helen had been tied up. Cooper shot her in the head. When both siblings were dead, Cooper poured diesel throughout the farmhouse and set it on fire. He walked away. The bodies of Richard and Helen Thomas burned inside their home. The farmhouse burned with them. Police investigated. The case was treated as a robbery that had gone wrong. A door-to-door search of the surrounding area was carried out. Officers knocked on the Cooper family's door. Cooper had made sure his family would cover for him. His son, still a child at the time, told police they had all been at home together. No one was charged. The case went cold. Richard and Helen Thomas had no answers. Their family had no answers. The file was kept open, but nothing moved. For the next 3.5 years, Cooper went on with his life. He continued his burglaries. He continued presenting himself to the outside world as an ordinary man from Milford Haven who liked to fish and dive along the coast he knew so well. On May 28, 1989, John William Cooper walked onto the set of a television game show called Bullseye and sat under the studio lights in front of a live audience and multiple cameras. Bullseye was one of the most popular programs on British television. It ran on ITV on Sunday afternoons and regularly drew audiences of up to 20 million people across the country. The format paired contestants in teams of two, one person throwing darts at an oversized board, and one person answering general knowledge questions, competing against two other pairs to win prizes. The host was a comedian named Jim Bowen, who had a warm, easy manner and a set of catchphrases the audience knew by heart. It was a cheerful, harmless Sunday afternoon program that families watched together. Nobody who tuned in every week thought anything unusual about the man who appeared on the episode recorded on May 28th. Cooper came on with a darts partner. He spoke to Jim Bowen in the warm-up section of the show, the way all contestants did. He talked about his interests. He spoke about the Pembrokeshire coastline and his knowledge of it. He talked about his scuba diving. He was relaxed and easy on camera. He and his partner competed in the first round, posted the lowest score of the three teams, and were knocked out. They did not win the star prize. They went home. The episode was broadcast. Millions of people watched it. Nobody watching had any reason to think about it again. 32 days later, on June 29, 1989, Peter Dixon and Gwenda Dixon left their campsite at Howlston Farm, near a small village called Little Haven in Pembrokeshire. Peter was 51. Gwenda was 52. They were from Oxfordshire, and they had been coming to this part of Wales on their summer holiday for 15 years. They loved it. They had two grown children, Timothy and Julie. Peter liked running. Gwenda played badminton. They were, as Peter's brother once described them, everything you would expect of an everyday English family. That morning they had told a fellow camper that they planned to take a short walk along the coastal path to let their tent dry out after the previous night's rain, then pack up and head home. They walked out of the campsite at around 9:30 in the morning, heading along the coastal path toward Dale. Peter was carrying binoculars and a camera. Gwenda had a small rucksack on her back. They did not come back. 6 days later, on July 5th, police dogs found their bodies lying face down under heavy undergrowth on a headland called Borough Head, about 600 yards from the campsite. Peter's hands had been tied behind his back. They had both been shot in the chest and head. Their belongings had been thrown further down the slope. Cooper had stopped them on the path, tied them up, put a sawn-off shotgun in their faces, and demanded their bank card and their PIN number. He robbed Peter Dixon of £300 in cash. He took Peter's wedding ring off his hand. Then he shot them both at point-blank range and hid their bodies under branches and undergrowth, jamming broken saplings into the ground and weaving them together to cover what he had done. He then drove to multiple cash machines across the area and used the Dixons' bank card to withdraw more money. Witnesses near one of those cash machines on July 1, in Haverfordwest, saw a dark-haired man with a shoulder-length mullet and distinctive khaki shorts making withdrawals. A police sketch was drawn from what those witnesses described. That sketch was shown on BBC's Crime Watch programme in September 1989. Calls flooded in. None of them led to John Cooper. The same shotgun had been used to kill the Thomas siblings in 1985 and to kill the Dixons in 1989. Police knew they were looking for one person. They had a sketch. They had the cash machine withdrawals. They had almost nothing else. The case received enormous attention. It was the largest murder investigation Pembrokeshire had ever seen, and yet the investigation went cold. No one was charged. In March 1996, Cooper attacked a group of 5 teenagers in a wooded area behind a housing estate in Milford Haven. He held them at gunpoint. He raped a 16-year-old girl and sexually assaulted a 15-year-old girl. He threatened all 5 of them. 2 years later, in 1998, Cooper was arrested during a robbery and charged with 30 counts of burglary and theft. At that point, investigators were not yet connecting him to the murders. He was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the burglaries and robberies. The 4 murders remained in cold case files. The teenage victims of the 1996 attack stayed silent for years out of fear of what he had threatened he would do to them. Cooper was released from prison in January 2009. In 2006, while Cooper was still serving his sentence, a detective named Steve Wilkins had returned to Wales after a period working at Scotland Yard in London. He took on a new senior role with Dyfed Powys Police and began looking at the two unsolved double murders from 1985 and 1989. Wilkins launched a new investigation called Operation Ottawa and put together a small, carefully chosen team. They went back through the 3,000 items of evidence that had been collected from Cooper's home during the earlier robbery investigation and began applying forensic methods that had not existed when the crimes happened. What they found was small but decisive. Forensic scientist Angela Gallup and her team examined a pair of khaki shorts that had been taken from Cooper's home. In the seams of those shorts, they found a microscopic drop of blood. It matched Peter Dixon, the man Cooper had shot on the coastal path in June 1989. The shorts had been kept by Cooper as what prosecutors would later describe as a trophy. His wife, Patricia, who had no knowledge of any of what her husband had done, had at some point altered the shorts by sewing them. That sewing had trapped DNA evidence inside the seams. Alongside Peter Dixon's blood, investigators found tiny fibers inside the pockets of the shorts. Those fibers matched fibers found on a sock belonging to Richard Thomas, the man Cooper had shot and burned inside the farmhouse 4 years before the Dixon murders. There was also the shotgun. It had been recovered during the earlier robbery case. Cooper had painted it black at some point after the murders, coating it thoroughly. But the paint was not perfect. Beneath the black coat, blood was still present. Forensic testing confirmed it was the weapon used in the killings. Then came the bullseye footage. Wilkins and his team knew that Cooper had appeared on the show in May 1989, just a month before he killed the Dixons. ITV still had the episode in its archive. Investigators obtained the footage. They found a frame of Cooper standing in a particular position on the studio set and froze it. They placed that frozen image alongside the police sketch drawn from the descriptions of witnesses who had seen a man using the Dixons' bank card at the cash machine in Haverfordwest 8 days after the murders. Wilkins later described the moment he showed the side-by-side comparison to the senior investigating officer on the case. He said they froze Cooper in exactly the same position as the sketch. The hair, the build, the moustache, the unkempt appearance, the way he was standing. Wilkins said it looked like a tracing. The officer he showed it to reportedly could not believe what he was seeing. The bullseye footage was not enough on its own to charge anyone with murder. A television appearance from 20 years earlier does not make someone a killer, but combined with Peter Dixon's blood in the seams of Cooper's shorts, fibers from both sets of victims connecting to his clothing, and the confirmed murder weapon recovered from his possessions, the footage gave the jury a face to attach to all of it. It placed Cooper in front of witnesses just weeks before the Dixons were killed. It confirmed what his build and appearance looked like at the exact time of the murders. It was one strand in a rope that had taken years and advances in science to twist together. Cooper was arrested in May 2009. He was charged with the murders of Richard Thomas, Helen Thomas, Peter Dixon, and Gwenda Dixon. He was also charged with the 1996 rape and sexual assault of the teenagers. His trial was held at Swansea Crown Court in Wales and lasted 9 weeks. His own son Andrew gave evidence for the prosecution and told the jury what his childhood had been like. The 2 young women attacked in 1996 gave evidence. Jurors were shown the bullseye footage. They heard the DNA evidence. They heard about the blood and the fibers. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On May 26, 2011, John William Cooper was found guilty of all charges. Judge John Griffith Williams sentenced him to a whole life order, meaning he will never be released from prison under any circumstances. At sentencing, the judge described Cooper as a very dangerous man who was highly predatory, and said the murders were of such wickedness that the mandatory sentence of life would mean exactly that. Cooper was 66 years old when he was convicted. Richard and Helen Thomas had been dead for 26 years. Peter and Gwenda Dixon had been dead for 22 years. Cooper has continued to maintain his innocence. In November 2012, his appeal against conviction was rejected. In April 2023, he submitted a second application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, asking for a review. As of 2026, he is 81 years old and serving his sentence at an undisclosed prison in the United Kingdom. His application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission remained under review as of late 2025 without resolution. Peter Dixon had been carrying his binoculars and his camera when he and his wife set out along the coastal path that morning. They had been coming to that part of Wales for 15 years. They were heading home that same day. Their tent was drying out back at the campsite. Their car was parked and waiting. Their son Timothy and their daughter Julie were expecting them back in Oxfordshire. None of that mattered to the man who had grown up knowing every part of that coastline, and who was willing to use a sawn-off shotgun on anyone who crossed his path. The television appearance did not catch Cooper on its own. The science caught him. The blood and the fibers and the shotgun caught him. But the footage from a Sunday afternoon darts game show, sitting untouched in an ITV archive for more than 2 decades, gave a face to a police sketch that no one had been able to match for 22 years. Cooper had walked onto that set to try to win a holiday, or a car, or a speedboat. What he left behind was the frame of footage that would one day be frozen and placed next to a drawing, and confirm what investigators already believed but could not yet prove. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 2 moves to a man who did not end up on television by chance. He went looking for it, sat under the lights of one of the most watched programs in America, won his episode, and charmed the national audience while actively killing women across 2 states. Level 2. The oblivious contestant Rodney Alcala, the serial killer who won the dating game in the middle of a murder spree. Rodney James Alcala was born Rodrigo Jacques Alcala Bucor on August 23, 1943, in San Antonio, Texas. He was the third of 4 children. His family moved to Mexico when he was 8 years old, and while they were there, his father abandoned them. His mother, Ana Maria Gutierrez, eventually brought Alcala and his siblings back to the United States and settled in suburban Los Angeles when he was 11. He was, by most accounts from his school years, a bright and reasonably popular student. He had an IQ of 135. He did well academically, he was good-looking, and knew how to talk to people. Nothing about the way he presented himself in those years suggested what was already forming underneath. At 17, Alcala enlisted in the United States Army. He trained as a paratrooper and then worked as a clerk. His time in the military ended badly. He had multiple disciplinary problems during his service, including incidents involving young women, and he suffered what was described as a nervous breakdown. He went absent without leave at one point, traveling nearly 3,000 miles from Fort Bragg in North Carolina, all the way back to his mother's home in California on his own. In 1964, the Army discharged him on medical grounds. A military doctor had examined him and given him a diagnosis that described a person who showed no regard for rules, other people, or the difference between right and wrong. He was 20 years old when they let him go. After leaving the Army, Alcala enrolled at the University of California, Los Angeles. He studied fine arts and graduated with a degree in 1968. He was handsome, smart, well-spoken, and had a quality that people noticed immediately. He could walk into a room and make people feel at ease. Women were drawn to him. He was the kind of person who seemed safe, even interesting, right up until he was not. On September 25, 1968, 8-year-old Tali Shapiro was walking to school along Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood when a car pulled up beside her. The man behind the wheel told her he knew her parents and offered her a ride. She got in. A passing motorist named Donald Haynes watched what happened, followed the car, and called the police. When officers arrived at the apartment building where the car had stopped, they found Tali Shapiro alive on the floor, beaten severely and covered in blood. She had been raped and beaten with a steel bar. She survived. The man who had taken her had run out through the back of the building the moment he heard police at the door. He disappeared before anyone could grab him. Tali Shapiro, still a child, had been left alone on the floor of a stranger's apartment. The man who had done this was 25-year-old Rodney Alcala, then a student at UCLA. Police went to his home and found large amounts of photography equipment and photographs of very young girls. They had his name, they did not have him. Alcala had already run. He changed his name to John Berger and traveled across the country to New York City, where he enrolled in film studies at New York University. He made friends, he went to parties, people found him charming. None of them had any idea who they were sitting next to. In 1971, the FBI placed him on their most wanted list. That same year, while in New York, he is believed to have killed a 23-year-old flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly, who had accepted his help moving furniture into her new apartment. He had told her he was a professional photographer who had studied under the director Roman Polanski, which was true, and she had agreed to let him help. She was strangled with her own stockings and left dead in her home. Her murder went unsolved for 4 decades. Alcala then obtained a job at an arts camp in New Hampshire called Camp New Beginnings, where he worked as a counselor for children. 2 of the girls at the camp recognized his photograph from an FBI Most Wanted poster they had seen at the local post office. They reported him to the dean. The dean called authorities. FBI agents contacted police in California. Alcala was arrested in August 1971 and brought back to Los Angeles. Here is where the system failed completely. Tali Shapiro's family had left the United States after the attack. Because she was not available to testify, prosecutors could not charge Alcala with what he had actually done to her. Instead, he was charged with the lesser offense of child molestation. He pleaded guilty. He served approximately 34 months in prison. He was released on parole in 1974 and was required to register as a sex offender. Within months of his release, he was arrested again, this time for assaulting a 13-year-old girl. He served 2 more years and was released again. In 1977, Alcala obtained a job as a typesetter at the Los Angeles Times, one of the biggest newspapers in the country. No background check flagged him. He was a registered sex offender with a conviction for attacking a child, and the Los Angeles Times hired him and gave him a regular paycheck. He began developing a different identity around that same time. He called himself a professional fashion photographer. He carried a camera everywhere. He told women and girls he could help build their modeling careers, that he knew people in the industry, that all they needed to do was let him take a few photographs. It worked constantly. Women trusted him. They were drawn in by his confidence, his looks, his easy way of talking. He had been using this approach even before his arrests, and now he used it more aggressively than ever. A co-worker at the Los Angeles Times later recalled that Alcala would share his photographs with people at work. She said she thought it was strange when she saw them. She said he told her the girls in the pictures were naked because their mothers had asked him to photograph them that way. A 17-year-old named Leanne Leadham, who lived near Alcala in 1979, remembered him inviting her to his mother's home to look through dozens of photographs he had taken of other teenagers before asking to photograph her at her parents' house. She said she had thought of herself as being a model for a professional. Neither she nor the co-worker at the Times had any way of knowing what the camera actually meant to the man holding it. Between November 1977 and June 1979, Alcala killed at least 5 women and girls in California. On November 9, 1977, he murdered Jill Barkham, an 18-year-old girl from New York who had moved to Los Angeles, hoping to make a life there. She was found on a dirt path near Mulholland Drive with ligature marks around her neck and her face beaten in with a rock. On December 16, 1977, he murdered Georgia Wickstead, a 27-year-old nurse who had just moved into her own apartment in Malibu. She was found naked and beaten, with her skull crushed, and severe injuries that investigators said showed the kind of violence that was hard to comprehend. On June 24, 1978, he killed Charlotte Lee Lamb, a 32-year-old legal secretary who was found dead in the laundry room of her apartment building in El Segundo, strangled with a shoelace and posed with her hands behind her back. Prosecutors described his method with victims in detail during his trials. They said Alcala would sometimes strangle women until they lost consciousness, then wait for them to revive, then strangle them again, repeating this process multiple times before finally killing them. In one case, a victim had been assaulted with a claw-toothed hammer. In others, the skull had been crushed with a rock. The bodies of his known California victims had all been found posed in carefully arranged positions. One detective who worked on the case described him as a killing machine. And in between murdering Charlotte Lamb in June 1978 and killing again in 1979, Rodney Alcala appeared on national television. The Dating Game was one of the most popular shows on American television. It had been running since 1965 on ABC and had become an institution. The format was simple. A woman sat on one side of a screen that blocked her view of 3 male contestants. She could hear them, but could not see them. She asked them questions and, based on how they answered, chose one of them to go on a date with, all expenses paid by the show. The show had a reputation for playful, slightly bold humor. The questions were often designed to get entertaining, cheeky answers out of the contestants, and the producers in the late 1970s specifically wanted responses that were more daring than in earlier years. Alcala auditioned for the show. The contestant coordinator at the time was a woman named Ellen Metzger. When she met him, she felt he would be perfect. He was attractive, he was confident, and she believed women watching would respond to him. She told the show's executive producer, Mike Metzger, that she wanted to cast him. Mike was less certain. He told Ellen that Alcala had a strange personality and made him uncomfortable. Ellen disagreed. At the time, there were no national crime databases for ordinary businesses to check. Background checks for game shows did not exist the way they do today. The producers had no way of knowing that Bachelor Number 1 had a history that included beating an 8-year-old girl with a steel bar, several years in prison, another assault conviction, and the bodies of at least 3 women already buried in different parts of California. Ellen's view prevailed. Alcala was booked. On September 13, 1978, the episode was taped. The Bachelorette was a young woman named Cheryl Bradshaw, a drama teacher from Phoenix, Arizona. Before the show, the 3 bachelors waited together in a green room. The man sitting next to Alcala that day was an actor named Jed Mills, who was Bachelor Number 2. Mills later described what Alcala was like before the cameras turned on. He said Alcala leaned over to him and said, "I always get the girl." Mills described him as obnoxious and creepy, and said he was the standout creepy figure of his life. When the taping began, host Jim Lang introduced Bachelor Number 1 to the audience. He described Alcala as a successful photographer who had gotten his start when his father found him in the darkroom at the age of 13, and said that between assignments, Alcala could be found skydiving or motorcycling. The audience had no way of knowing that the man being described this way had spent parts of the previous year strangling women and leaving them in laundry rooms and on canyon paths. Cheryl Bradshaw began asking her questions. She asked Alcala what his best time was. He told her the best time was at night. She asked him to imagine he was a dish she was serving for dinner, and asked what he was called and what he looked like. He told her he was called the Banana, and he looked good. She told him she wanted more detail. He said, "Peel me." The audience laughed. Bradshaw laughed. Alcala sat behind the partition, smiling at how well it was going. At the end of the episode, Bradshaw chose Bachelor Number 1. She had selected the man who, at the time she chose him, had already killed at least 5 people. When the show finished taping and Bradshaw went backstage to meet the man she had picked, something changed immediately. She later told the Sunday Telegraph in 2012 that she started to feel ill when she met him in person. She said he was acting really creepy and that she wanted to leave. She found the producers and told them she could not go through with the date, that she was getting a very strange feeling from him and was not comfortable. The show's contestant coordinator told her that was not going to be a problem. The date was cancelled. Alcala was apparently furious about the rejection. People close to the investigation into his crimes later said they believed the rejection by Bradshaw made him angrier and more dangerous in the months that followed. Whether or not Bradshaw's refusal specifically triggered what came next, what is documented is that between September 1978 and the summer of 1979, Alcala continued killing. On February 14, 1979, Alcala picked up a 15-year-old hitchhiker named Monique Hoyt in Riverside County. He drove her to his apartment, where he assaulted her. He then drove her to a remote mountainous area near Joshua Tree, California, telling her he wanted to take photographs of her for a modeling portfolio. In that isolated area, he assaulted her again and struck her in the head with a rock. When he stopped at a gas station on the drive back and went into the bathroom, Monique Hoyt escaped from his car. She went to the clerk at a nearby motel and asked him to call police. Alcala was arrested that same evening. His mother posted his bail a month later. He was free again. On June 14, 1979, he raped and strangled 21-year-old Jill Parenteau in her apartment in Burbank. He cut himself on a window screen while leaving and left blood at the scene. That blood would later confirm he was the killer. 6 days later, on June 20, 1979, 12-year-old Robin Samso left her home in Huntington Beach, California, on her way to a ballet class. She was riding a bicycle that belonged to a friend. She never arrived. Witnesses later reported seeing a man with long hair approach her near the beach and photograph her. Police developed a sketch from those witness descriptions. Robin's skeletal remains were found 12 days later in the San Gabriel Mountains, approximately 50 miles north of Huntington Beach. She had been kidnapped, assaulted, and killed. A friend of Robin's recognized the police sketch. She told officers that the man in the drawing had spoken to her and Robin at the beach and had asked to take their photographs. Robin's friend had taken down the license plate of the man's car. That plate led investigators to a name. That name was Rodney Alcala. His parole officer also recognized the sketch and confirmed it. Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. When investigators searched a storage locker connected to Alcala in Seattle, Washington, they found more than 1,000 photographs of women, teenage girls, and children, many of them in positions that showed they had not fully understood what they were participating in. Investigators withheld approximately 900 of those photographs from public release because they were too explicit. Among the items in the locker were pairs of earrings. One pair of gold ball earrings was later confirmed to have belonged to Robin Samsoe. Another pair of earrings found in the same locker carried DNA that matched Charlotte Lamb, the woman he had strangled in a laundry room in 1978. Prosecutors said Alcala had kept these items as trophies. He had taken pieces of jewelry from the women he killed and stored them alongside the photographs of the women he had approached but not yet harmed. Alcala went to trial in 1980 for Robin Samsoe's murder and was convicted and sentenced to death. The California Supreme Court overturned that conviction in 1984 because jurors had been incorrectly told about his prior criminal record before they reached their verdict. He was tried again in 1986 and convicted again and sentenced to death again. A federal appeals court overturned that conviction in 2001 on separate legal grounds. His case came to trial for a third time in 2010. By then, DNA technology had advanced far enough to connect him to the murders of Jill Barkham, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parenteau, as well as Robin Samsoe. For his third trial, Alcala chose to act as his own lawyer. He stood up in the courtroom and questioned himself, using a deeper voice when asking questions and his normal voice when answering them. He called himself Mr. Alcala during these exchanges. At one point during his closing argument, he played a song by singer Arlo Guthrie called Alice's Restaurant, in which a character describes wanting to kill people. He played this song for the jury that was deciding whether he would live or die. As part of his defense, he showed the jury a portion of his 1978 appearance on The Dating Game, arguing that the gold earrings found in his storage locker were his own and not Robin Samsoe's. Fellow contestant Jed Mills, testifying against this claim, told the court that earrings on men were not socially accepted in 1978 and that he would have noticed them if Alcala had been wearing them that day on the show. He had not been wearing them. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days. On February 25, 2010, they found Alcala guilty on all 5 counts of first-degree murder. On March 9, 2010, he was sentenced to death for the third time. In 2011, a grand jury in New York charged Alcala with the 1971 murder of Cornelia Crilly and the 1977 murder of Ellen Jane Hover, a 23-year-old woman whose diary had shown a meeting scheduled with a man named John Berger, the alias Alcala had been using at the time. In December 2012, Alcala pleaded guilty to both New York murders. On January 7, 2013, he was sentenced to 25 years to life for each of those deaths. The murders of Cornelia Crilly and Ellen Hover had gone unsolved for over 40 years. In 2010, following Alcala's conviction, the Huntington Beach Police Department released more than 100 of the photographs from the Seattle storage locker to the public. Orange County District Attorney Tony Rakakis explained that they had balanced privacy concerns against the need to identify potential victims. Within days of the release, police had received more than 400 phone calls from people across the country and from as far away as Denmark, all of them recognizing women they believed to be their mothers, sisters, or daughters in those decades-old photographs. Some of the women in the photographs came forward alive and said they had once posed for a photographer they had believed was professional. In 2013, a woman recognized her sister, Christine Ruth Thornton, in one of the released photographs. Thornton had disappeared in 1977 while 6 months pregnant, and her remains had been found in Wyoming in 1982 without being identified. DNA testing confirmed the remains were hers. In 2016, Alcala was charged with her murder in Wyoming. Because of his deteriorating health, he was never extradited to face that charge. The total number of people Alcala was confirmed to have killed was 7. The total number he may have actually killed has been estimated by investigators at anywhere from a dozen to more than 130. Approximately 900 of the photographs found in the storage locker were never released publicly because of their explicit nature. Their subjects have never been identified. Rodney Alcala died on July 24, 2021, of a heart attack at a hospital in Kings County, California. He was 77 years old and had been on death row at Corcoran State Prison. He died without ever being executed. He died without ever confirming how many people he had killed. Tali Shapiro, the 8-year-old girl he had left bleeding on the floor of his apartment in 1968, and who had survived to see his final conviction, told the New York Times after his death that the planet was a better place without him. Cheryl Bradshaw, the woman who chose him on a game show in 1978 and then refused to go through with the date because something felt wrong to her, survived. The gold earrings belonging to Robin Samsoe that he had kept in a box in a storage locker across the country from where he killed her were among the items that helped send him back to court for the third and final time. The show's executive producer Mike Metzger, looking back decades later, said that Alcala had a strange personality from the moment they met at the audition. His wife Ellen, the contestant coordinator who had pushed to book him, said he was attractive and that she had believed all the women watching would love him. Robin Samsoe had been 12 years old. She was on her way to ballet class. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 3 moves to a man who did not charm a television audience from behind a partition. He stood on a front porch, looked directly into a news camera, and pleaded for the safe return of his wife and daughters. His family had been missing for less than 24 hours. He had killed them himself the night before. Level 3. The family next door. Timothy Bleefnick, the Family Feud contestant, who joked about his marriage on national TV 3 years before he shot his wife 14 times. Rebecca Bernadette Posel was born and raised in Quincy, Illinois, a small city that sits along the Mississippi River in the western part of the state. She was the kind of student who earned every honor available to her. She graduated as valedictorian from Quincy Notre Dame High School. She went on to Quincy University, where she graduated with the highest level of academic honor. She had always known she wanted to work in medicine. She started her career in pharmaceutical sales, but at some point during those years, she realized she wanted to be closer to the patients, not just the products. She went back to school for nursing. She finished her final semester of nursing school while pregnant with her 3rd child, completing everything she needed to complete before her son was born. She became an emergency room nurse at Blessing Hospital in Quincy. In 2020, just weeks before the world shut down for a pandemic, Blessing Hospital gave her the Daisy Award, a national honor given to nurses who show extraordinary care and kindness toward patients. Her sister Sarah later described nursing as Becky's true calling, saying she was able to provide comfort to people during some of the hardest moments of their lives. The people who knew Becky described her the same way again and again. She was a devoted mother. Her 3 boys were the center of everything she did. She built elaborate Halloween costumes for them that actually moved. She made custom signs for their first day of school every single year. She took them fishing and frog hunting and threw herself into every sport they played. Her obituary called her the definition of a boy mum. Friends used the same word over and over when they talked about her: present. No matter how long her shifts were, no matter how much the marriage was crumbling around her, she was always present for her boys. Timothy Bleefnick was born on June 1, 1983, in Quincy, the same city where Becky grew up. He and Becky both attended Quincy University, where they met. He was a football player. He was in the Quincy University Athletic Hall of Fame. He was charismatic, well-liked, and had a confidence that came from being a big person in a small town. They married in 2009. They had 3 sons together. By the time the marriage started to break apart, their boys were ages 12, 10, and 5. Tim worked as the general manager of a recycling facility called Quincy Recycle. He owned a CrossFit gym in town called Q-Town CrossFit. He was involved in community theatre. He had a degree in criminal justice from Quincy University. He had studied, in school, exactly how crimes get solved. In the fall of 2019, the Bleefnick family drove to a studio and taped an episode of Family Feud, the long-running American game show hosted by Steve Harvey. The show pairs families against each other to answer survey questions about what most people in America would say in response to various prompts. It is a cheerful, loud, crowd-pleasing show. The Bleefnick family came dressed for it. Tim wore a bow tie. They were animated and warm in front of the cameras, the kind of family that makes a live studio audience laugh. The episode aired in January 2020. At some point during the taping, Steve Harvey asked the question that would eventually be replayed across every news broadcast covering the case that came 3 years later. He asked the contestants, "What was the biggest mistake you made at your wedding?" Tim Bleefnick stepped up to the podium, looked into the camera, and said, "Honey, I love you, but said I do." The studio audience let out a groan. Some people laughed. Tim immediately tried to walk it back. He said, "Not my mistake, not my mistake. I love my wife. I am going to get in trouble for that, are I not?" Steve Harvey looked at him with a blank stare and told him the answer was going to need to be on the board in the number 2 or 3 spot to save him from serious trouble at home. The answer did land on the board. Regretting a marriage was the second most common response, chosen by 20 out of 100 people surveyed. Nobody watching that episode in January 2020 thought much about it. It was a game show answer, designed to get a reaction from a crowd. Tim himself later said it was not said with any bad intentions and was meant to be funny. The audience laughed and the show moved on. But underneath the bow tie and the studio lights, the marriage that Tim had made a joke about on national television was already falling apart in ways that were frightening to the woman living inside it. By the time the pandemic began in March 2020, Becky had been telling close friends that Tim did not want to be married anymore. One friend, Shannon Krause, said that when Becky told her the marriage was in trouble, she was shocked, because from the outside, they had seemed like the perfect couple. Becky's sister Sarah described what she had watched happen inside that marriage over the previous years. She said Tim was not contributing to the household. She said he was not supportive of Becky's demanding nursing career. She said he would criticize Becky for the house not being clean, but never offered to help clean it himself. Sarah said the family started calling Becky the single married mother because she was essentially running the house, raising the children, and working demanding hospital shifts largely on her own, while Tim became more and more withdrawn from the life they had built together. In January 2021, Tim filed for divorce. He moved out of the family home and into a rental property approximately 1 mile away. Becky stayed in the house at 2528 Kentucky Road in Quincy with their 3 boys. The divorce proceedings dragged on. What started as a painful but ordinary separation became something much darker as the months passed. The 2 things Becky cared about most in those proceedings were money and her children. On the money side, documents showed Tim earned roughly $13,000 a month from his work at the recycling facility and the CrossFit gym. Becky, working as a nurse, earned roughly $5,400 a month. Becky sought maintenance payments from Tim, as well as fair child support. Tim's position, filed ahead of what was supposed to be the divorce trial, was that he wanted 60% of the parenting time in his favor, that he should pay no child support, and that he should take possession of the family home at 2528 Kentucky Road. On the question of maintenance, testimony at trial confirmed that if Becky died before the divorce was finalized, Tim would owe her nothing. Her second divorce attorney, Gerald Timmer-Wilker, was asked this directly in court. The answer was 0. The second thing Becky cared about, and refused to move on, was keeping Tim's father, Raymond Bleefnick, away from her boys without supervision. Ray Bleefnick, a retired sales consultant, had purchased a house on the same block as Becky after the separation. Becky filed a restraining order against Ray on behalf of her children in August 2021. She told friends in written messages that she did not want Ray Bleefnick to have any unsupervised contact with her sons ever again. She had told her friend Nicole Bateman that Tim had warned her that if she exposed something about his father, Ray would likely have to move away and might harm himself. She had told another friend she feared Ray might secretly try to take the children away from her. The court denied her restraining order request, finding the allegations did not rise to the level required for an emergency protection order. Becky's position on this did not change. Tim's position was that Ray be granted unsupervised contact. Her attorney Timur Wilke testified at trial that on this point, Tim considered the matter non-negotiable. The divorce trial had been rescheduled twice. It was finally set to begin in March 2023. Becky was expected at that trial to bring witnesses who would testify about Ray Bliefnick's history. That testimony was expected to be damaging. By 2022, Becky was moving forward with her life. She had begun dating a man named Ted Johnson. She was building a future that did not include her marriage. But the path toward the end of the marriage was becoming increasingly hostile. Both Tim and Becky had filed restraining orders against each other at different points. Court documents from the divorce contained serious allegations. Becky had told friends in text messages that Tim had said to her, "You will be dead before you get any of my money." A friend named Melissa Young ran into Becky at a store at some point during this period, and later testified that Becky appeared mentally exhausted, and that Becky had told her she felt like Tim could snap at any moment. She had also written things down. In one message, Becky wrote, "The thought has gone through my mind that I may need a restraining order. I am definitely changing the locks as soon as I can. The only way to ensure all three sons choose him over me is to eliminate me as the choice." In another message, she told a friend that Tim cared more about hurting her than he cared about anything else, and that she feared he might go off the deep end if he did not get what he wanted in the divorce. A family friend named Gary Collins testified that in July 2022, a tearful Becky had told him she thought Tim was hiding assets, and that if anything ever happened to her, it would be Tim who was responsible. A nursing colleague named Sarah Murphy testified that Becky had spoken to her repeatedly about the divorce and had told her directly, "If anything ever happens to me, make sure Tim is looked at." Becky had also confided in longtime friends about a larger fear surrounding what was happening. Text messages shown to the jury during the trial showed Becky telling Nicole Bateman that she was afraid of what Tim might do. The situation around Tim's father had become a serious issue in the divorce proceedings. Becky did not want Tim's father to have any contact with her children without supervision. She had been planning to bring witnesses to the upcoming divorce trial to testify about her father-in-law's behavior. One of those pieces of testimony was expected to be deeply damaging. The divorce trial was scheduled for the week of February 27, 2023. In the weeks before Becky was killed, a series of events were happening that investigators would later piece together one by one. On February 10, 2023, Tim Bliefnick called the Quincy Police Department. He was under a court order to return a 9mm handgun to Becky. The gun had originally been a gift from Becky to Tim, but during the divorce she had asked for it back, and the court had ordered him to return it. When the receptionist at the police department answered the phone, Tim identified himself and said he had a gun he needed to return to his ex-wife, and that he did not want to give it to her face-to-face. He referred to Becky in language that made the receptionist take note. The call was transferred to a lieutenant. Tim told the officer that Becky finally had a gun safe. The officer told Tim the police department could not return the gun for him. Becky never received the gun. When police searched Tim's home after the murder, they found an empty gun safe. On the morning of February 23, 2023, the same morning Becky was killed, a neighbor named Amy Schmiedeskamp, who lived on the same block, saw Tim Bliefnick visit his father Ray's house between 7:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning. He dropped off a child's basketball hoop. He then left. At some point during the month before the murder, Tim asked a neighbor named Bradley Amon whether he had any security cameras pointed toward his backyard. In the early hours of February 22, 2023, the security camera belonging to Becky's next-door neighbor Taylor Hyman captured movement in the driveway alongside Becky's house. At 1:05 in the morning, a person was seen walking toward the back of Becky's property. 48 minutes later, that same person appeared to be walking away. Nothing happened that night, but investigators would later recognize this as a dry run. The same camera captured a similar incident on Valentine's Day, February 14th. On the night of that Valentine's Day visit, between 1:10 and 1:48 in the morning, Tim Bliefnick's laptop had been making rapid searches for the license plate number and vehicle identification number of Ted Johnson's car, which had been parked outside Becky's house while Johnson was spending the night. On the night of February 22, Becky's boyfriend Ted Johnson was at her home and stayed the night. He left early the following morning, February 23. At 1:11 in the morning, on February 23, 2023, someone entered Becky Bleefnick's home at 2528 Kentucky Road. Police believe the intruder climbed onto the roof and pried open a window in one of the boys' empty bedrooms using a crowbar. The boys were not home. They were at Tim's house, 1 mile away, because Becky had recently had surgery and was still recovering. At the exact moment the window was forced open, Becky tried to dial 911 from her cell phone. She managed to press 9, 1, 1, 2, and 6 before her phone was knocked out of her hands. Police found her phone behind the bedroom door. The call never went through. Becky Bleefnick was 41 years old. She was alone in her house. She was still recovering from surgery. Her 3 boys were 1 mile away, asleep at their father's house. Becky's father, Bill Posel, discovered her body on the afternoon of February 23, after she failed to show up to pick up her children from school. He found her on the floor of her upstairs bathroom. He called 911. Investigators arrived and found her with 14 gunshot wounds across her body. None of those wounds had been immediately fatal. Prosecutors later told the court that based on the evidence, Becky had spent her last minutes lying on the floor, alone, in the dark, in severe pain, waiting to die. The Quincy police chief, Adam Yates, later said publicly that the sheer number of shots told investigators something important. He said there was no reason to shoot someone 14 times if the goal was simply to kill them. The number spoke to something else entirely. Police began building a picture of what had happened in the hours before and after the murder. Surveillance cameras from multiple locations around the neighborhood had captured a person on a bicycle. The footage showed the bicycle moving in the direction of Becky's house shortly before the time of the murder and moving away from it shortly after. A search of the area found the bicycle abandoned about half a mile from Tim Bleefnick's home. When investigators looked into who had purchased that bicycle, they found it had been bought through Facebook Marketplace under a fake name, using a John Smith account that was registered to Tim Bleefnick's iPhone. When they examined Tim's computer, the account used to buy the bicycle was linked directly to him. Investigators also found that Tim had been searching for a second bicycle on Facebook Marketplace in the weeks before the murder, approaching another seller about a black mongoose bike. On March 1, 2023, investigators executed a search warrant at Tim Bleefnick's home. What they found inside that home was a wall of evidence. They found more than 24 shell casings in his basement. Forensic testing showed those shell casings had been fired from the same gun as 8 shell casings found beside Becky's body. Tim had told police he had not seen the 9mm handgun in 3 years. The gun itself was never found. But the casings from his basement matched the casings from her bathroom floor. His computer also contained his search history. In the weeks before Becky was murdered, Tim Bleefnick had searched how to pry open a door with a crowbar. He had searched how to wash gunpowder off his hands. He had searched the Quincy Police Department response time. He had searched how to make a homemade silencer for a pistol out of plastic shopping bags. He had searched how to trace shotgun rounds fired from a specific gun. He had searched how to pick locks and how to open windows from the outside. Prosecutors at trial said those searches did not look like the actions of an innocent person. Tim Bleefnick had studied criminal justice at university. He had spent years learning how crimes get investigated and how people get caught. And in the weeks before his estranged wife was shot 14 times in her own bathroom, he had used his computer to research every piece of the crime he was planning. His phone records and fitness tracker data also placed him near the scene at the time of the murder. His Whoop fitness band had disconnected during the window when investigators believed the crime was committed. His phone had been locked. His laptop had made no searches during that same window. When his phone reconnected and his devices came back online, the bicycle was already being abandoned half a mile from his home. Tim Bleefnick was arrested on March 13, 2023, 18 days after Becky was killed. In the days between the murder and his arrest, he had attended Becky's wake. He had shown up to her funeral and left early. Photographs taken on the day of her burial showed him standing on his front porch in a t-shirt and sweatpants as relatives returned from the cemetery with the boys. His trial began on May 23, 2023, exactly 3 months after Becky was murdered. prosecutors presented more than 200 pieces of evidence and called 46 witnesses. The defense presented no evidence and called no witnesses. In her opening argument, defense attorney Casey Schnack told the jury the case was dripping with reasonable doubt. The entire case built around Tim Bleefnick was circumstantial. There was no video of him committing the murder. No one had seen him at the house that night. But the shell casings, the bicycle, the search history, the surveillance footage, the fitness tracker, the phone data, and the fake Facebook account used to buy the bike all lined up in the same direction, and every single piece of it pointed at him. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned on May 31, 2023, and found Timothy Bleefnick guilty on all 3 counts: 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of home invasion. He was handcuffed at the defense table the moment the verdict was read. Sentencing took place on August 11, 2023. Tim Bleefnick declined to make a statement to the judge. Becky's mother, Bernadette Posel, stood in the courtroom and addressed him directly. She told him he had replaced her grandson's mother's love with emotional scars and trauma. She told him they were left with an emptiness that could not be filled. She told him his soul was black with hate and that he should never be allowed to be free again. Her aunt Susan Parker had a statement read on her behalf, which said she lives on in her 3 sons. Judge Robert Adrian addressed Tim Bleefnick directly before handing down the sentence. He counted out loud. He said, "You shot her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times." He then sentenced Timothy Bleefnick to natural life in prison, the most severe sentence available in a state where the death penalty no longer exists. Natural life in Illinois means the same thing as life without the possibility of parole anywhere else. Tim Bleefnick will die in prison. Becky's 3 sons, Deacon, Grayson, and Arlen, now live with Becky's parents, Bill and Bernadette Posel. Her parents are in the process of adopting the boys. Sarah Riley, Becky's sister, spoke publicly in the aftermath of the conviction and called for stronger protections for victims of domestic violence. She said Tim had orchestrated the worst possible horror for her father by making him the one who found Becky's body, and that it had not been enough for him to murder her. He had to make her father carry that image for the rest of his life. Tim Bleefnick gave an interview to CBS's 48 Hours before sentencing in which he maintained his innocence. He said the idea of murdering someone, let alone the mother of his children, was not any part of who he was. He said his answer on Family Feud had not been said with any bad intentions and was meant to be funny. His appeal of the conviction is ongoing. The episode of Family Feud that the Bleefnick family appeared on was taped in the fall of 2019 and aired in January 2020. It had been replayed millions of times across social media by the time the murder trial began. The clip of Tim standing at the podium telling Steve Harvey that saying "I do" was the biggest mistake he made at his wedding, and then immediately backtracking, had become one of the most watched moments in the show's history for reasons nobody who watched the original broadcast could have anticipated. Becky Bleefnick had graduated top of her nursing class while pregnant with her 3rd child. She had won a national award for the way she cared for patients. Her boys had been her entire world. She had a divorce trial scheduled for the week after she was killed, a trial that she had been preparing for and that she had every reason to believe would finally put distance between herself and the man she had married in 2009. She was found on the floor of her bathroom. She was 41 years old. Her youngest son was 5. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 4 moves to a case where the gap between the public face and the private reality reached a scale that left investigators stunned. The next man did not just give one television interview. He gave multiple interviews, appeared on regional news programs, spoke to reporters for weeks, and positioned himself as a figure of grief and community support, while 2 10-year-old girls lay dead in a ditch 10 miles from his front door. Level 4. The community spokesman Ian Huntley, the man who murdered 2 10-year-old girls and then became the face of the search for them on live TV. Ian Kevin Huntley was born on January 31, 1974, in Grimsby, a port town in northeast Lincolnshire in the north of England. He grew up in a working-class family. as the first son of Kevin and Linda Huntley. His childhood was not easy. He had asthma. He was bullied badly enough during his school years that by the time he was 13, the harassment had become so severe that he had to transfer to a different school entirely to escape it. He left school with very few qualifications. He worked a series of low-skilled jobs, moving frequently between positions and rented homes. He worked as a barman, a bar manager, and in various caretaking roles. He dressed well, presented himself carefully, and had a way of making people around him feel at ease. He told people elaborate stories about his past. He told some people he had been an RAF pilot. He told others he had won the lottery. Neither was true. In December 1994, when he was 20 years old, Huntley met a woman named Claire Evans. She was 18. They married after a short period together. The marriage collapsed almost immediately, and she moved in with his younger brother. Huntley was furious. In the year that followed, between August 1995 and May 1996, he began pursuing sexual relationships with multiple teenage girls in the Grimsby area. 3 of them were 15 years old. 1 was 13. Each of these cases was reported to police at some point. None of them resulted in charges because each of the girls denied having been involved with Huntley when police approached them. One of the 15-year-old girls became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter in 1998. That daughter, named Samantha, grew up not knowing who her father was. She discovered his identity years later while working on a school project. She was 14 when she found out. By 1998, rumors about Huntley's behavior toward underage girls had spread through the community in Grimsby widely enough that neighbors and colleagues were openly insulting him in the street. None of that translated into formal action against him. In January 1998, he appeared in court charged with burgling a neighbor's house and stealing electrical goods, jewelry, and cash. The prosecution offered no evidence, and the case was ordered to lie on file, meaning it was set aside without a conviction. In May of that year, he was charged with the rape of an 18-year-old woman. That case also did not proceed to trial due to insufficient evidence. By 2001, Huntley had been investigated or questioned by Humberside police on 10 separate occasions over allegations involving sexual offences and underage girls, and had been in contact with social services 5 times. None of those 10 occasions had produced a criminal record that would show up under normal background checking procedures, partly because the cases had not led to convictions, and partly because civilian staff at Humberside Police had carried out a record-clearing process in July 2000 in which data relating to allegations that had not resulted in conviction was deleted. What remained of Huntley's history was fragmented between different systems and different police forces that did not talk to each other. In February 1999, Huntley met Maxine Carr at a nightclub in Grimsby. She was 22 years old. They moved in together after 4 weeks. Maxine later provided him with a false alibi in connection with one of the sexual assault allegations from that period. That would not be the last time she provided him with one. In 2001, Huntley learned through his father, who worked as a school caretaker in Cambridgeshire, about a vacancy at Soham Village College. He applied using the name Ian Nixon, which was his mother's maiden name. On the application form, he disclosed that he was also known as Ian Huntley. No one at Cambridgeshire Police checked the name Huntley. No one at the school checked his references. The principal of Soham Village College later admitted this in public. Huntley was offered the position of senior caretaker in November 2001 and started work on November 26. The school also helped him secure the tenancy of a house at 5 College Close, just down the road from the college. Huntley and Maxine Carr moved to Soham in late September 2001. In February 2002, Huntley helped Maxine get a part-time job as a teaching assistant at St Andrew's Primary School, where Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were students. The girls were in Maxine's class. They were fond of her. Holly Marie Wells and Jessica Amie Chapman had been best friends since they were 4 years old. They had grown up together in Soham, a small market town in Cambridgeshire in the east of England. They were 10 years old when they died. The people who knew them described 2 girls who were practically joined at the hip, who looked more like sisters than just friends. They went to the same school, St Andrew's Primary, in Soham. They spent their free time together constantly. In 2002, they were both in the class of a teaching assistant named Maxine Carr, and they were fond of her. Maxine had become a familiar and trusted face in their lives. That trust was the thing that killed them. On Sunday, August 4th, 2002, Holly's family was having a barbecue at their home on Red House Gardens in Soham. Jessica had come over at around noon, and the two girls spent the afternoon the way they usually spent their afternoons together. They played computer games, listened to music, and spent time with Holly's family and a friend named Natalie Parr. By mid-afternoon, both girls had changed into matching red replica Manchester United football shirts, one belonging to Holly and one belonging to her older brother Oliver, who let Jessica wear it. At 5:04 in the afternoon, Holly's mother Nicola photographed the two of them together in those shirts before they sat down to dinner with the other guests. They went back upstairs after dinner and spent time online, sending emails between 5:11 and 5:32 that evening. At around 6:15 in the evening, Holly and Jessica slipped out of the house without telling anyone at the barbecue where they were going. They were heading to a nearby sports center to get sweets from a vending machine. They were 10 years old, they were in a small town they had grown up in, and they were together. Their route took them past a house on College Close, a street near Soham Village College. The man who lived at 5 College Close saw them walking past and called out to them. His name was Ian Kevin Huntley. He was 28 years old. He worked as the senior caretaker at Soham Village College, the secondary school just down the road. He had moved to Soham less than a year earlier with his girlfriend Maxine Carr, who had since gotten a job as a teaching assistant at the girls' primary school. The girls knew Maxine. They liked her. When Huntley called out to them from his doorstep, he told them Maxine was inside the house and asked them in. Maxine Carr was not in the house. She was approximately 100 miles away in Grimsby, visiting her family. She had spent that weekend at a nightclub in Grimsby, where she was photographed with a 17-year-old rugby player. Huntley knew she was not home. He told the girls she was there anyway. Both girls walked through the front door of 5 College Close at approximately 6:17 that evening. Cell phone records later showed that Jessica's mobile phone, which she had with her, sent its last signal from a tower covering the area directly around Huntley's home just 30 minutes after they disappeared. Within a short time of Holly and Jessica entering the house, Huntley had murdered both of them. The exact details of what happened inside that house were never fully established. At his trial, Huntley claimed that Holly had suffered a nosebleed and that he had taken her to the bathroom to help, and that she had slipped backwards into a bath that was half filled with water and drowned. He claimed that Jessica had begun screaming and that he put his hand over her mouth to silence her and accidentally suffocated her. He said that when he looked at Holly in the bathtub, she was already dead. The jury heard this account and rejected every part of it. Huntley later reportedly admitted to his father, while in prison, that he had lied during the trial. He reportedly told his father that he killed Jessica to prevent her from using her phone to call for help. After both girls were dead, Huntley spent time cleaning his home with a strong cleaning fluid. He drove his Ford Fiesta to a car wash and scrubbed the wheel arches and the floor pedals. He removed the rear seat cover and the boot lining of the car and replaced them with household carpet that did not fit properly. He cut the girls' matching Manchester United shirts and their shoes off their bodies, took those items back to Soham and hid them in a waste bin at Soham Village College where he worked. He then loaded both bodies into his car and drove approximately 20 miles east toward RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk, an area he knew from previous visits for plane spotting, and also an area near his father's home. He dumped the bodies of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman in an irrigation ditch near a pheasant pen close to the perimeter of the base. He set fire to them in an attempt to destroy any evidence connecting him to what he had done. He then went home, and when Holly and Jessica were reported missing that same night, Huntley became the man who had last seen them alive. Holly's mother Nicola had gone looking for the girls at around 8 o'clock that evening. By 9:55 that night, the parents of both girls had contacted police. The search that followed grew into one of the biggest and most widely covered missing persons investigations in British history. More than 400 police officers worked on it. Volunteers spread across the area. Flyers went up. Camera crews arrived from across the country. The families of Holly and Jessica stood in front of microphones and cameras pleading for the safe return of their daughters. Holly's parents were Kevin and Nicola Wells. Jessica's parents were Les and Sharon Chapman. Both families were devastated and desperate. Ian Huntley inserted himself into all of it. In the days immediately after the girls went missing, Huntley presented himself to police as a key witness. He was, after all, the last person to have seen them. He told investigators that the girls had knocked on his door that evening to ask whether Maxine had gotten a permanent teaching job she had applied for. He said he told them she had not gotten it, that they had expressed their sympathies, and that they had then walked off in the direction of the local library. He described grooming his dog on the doorstep when they approached. He said he watched them walk away. Investigators had no reason at that point to question this account too deeply. Huntley had a job at a school. He lived in a house provided by that school. He had a girlfriend who had worked with the girls at their primary school. He cooperated with questions. He seemed concerned. By the second week of the search, Ian Huntley had become, by his own design, the unofficial spokesman for the community of Soham. He explained his reason for stepping forward to the cameras by saying he wanted to convey the frustration and sadness that the whole town was feeling. He gave interviews to Sky News. He appeared on the regional BBC news programme, BBC Look East. On August 10, 2002, a BBC journalist named Rachel Dane conducted an interview at Huntley's home on College Close. Huntley appeared at the beginning of that interview. The clip was later played on Sky News. In the interview, he spoke about the girls and the community and the search. He appeared composed and concerned. In a separate Sky News interview on August 15th, conducted by correspondent Jeremy Thompson, Huntley told the camera that he was holding on to a glimmer of hope that the girls would be found safe and well. He said that he had last seen them walking in the direction of the library. He was calm. He was articulate. He looked directly into the camera and said what a worried community member would say. The girls were already dead. They had been dead for 11 days by the time he said this. Their bodies were in a ditch 10 miles away. The same BBC Look East interview from August 10 that had featured Huntley also included Maxine Carr. Something about the interview with Carr struck the cameraman, Sean Whitmore, as deeply wrong. At one point during the conversation, Carr began speaking about Holly and Jessica in the past tense. She said they always used to come up to her and confide in her. She said Jessica was very funny. She said Holly was just like a little angel. After the interview was broadcast, people watching noticed she had used the past tense about two girls who were still officially missing. She also laughed at one point during the recording. When the reporter pointed out she was speaking in the past tense, the filming paused briefly. The interview continued. Carr corrected herself and spoke in the present tense for the remainder. Both Carr and Huntley knew the girls were dead. They had known since the night of August 4. Maxine Carr had been in Grimsby when the murders happened, and she had no part in what Huntley did. But when she came back and learned what had happened, she chose to lie for him. She told police she had been at home with Huntley on the evening the girls disappeared. She provided him with a false account of that evening. That lie placed Huntley inside the house on College Close with Maxine rather than alone with two children, who then went missing. The alibi was the same kind of lie she had told for him before, back in Grimsby, when another allegation had been investigated and quietly abandoned. That earlier rehearsal had protected him then. This one did not hold. By August 16th, Grimsby residents who had seen Huntley in his television appearances had started calling police. They recognized him. They told officers he had previously faced rape allegations in Grimsby. Others called to say that Maxine Carr had absolutely been in Grimsby on the night of August 4, that she had been seen at a nightclub, that phone records would confirm she was never in Soham that evening. The account she and Huntley had been giving to police for 2 weeks was falling apart from 100 miles away. On August 16th, 13 days after Holly and Jessica had disappeared, Huntley and Carr were both brought in for questioning. Each was interviewed for more than 7 hours. During his questioning, Huntley refused to answer questions properly, appeared evasive, and at times drooled, which investigators recognized as an attempt to appear mentally unwell. He was referred to a mental hospital for evaluation. Carr, meanwhile, told police the truth about where she had been. She admitted she had lied about the alibi. She told investigators that when she had returned to Soham from Grimsby, Huntley had told her on the phone that the two girls had come into the house and that something had happened. She said he had told her the girls had come in so that Holly could deal with a nosebleed. She said she had not known what had actually happened and had chosen to protect him anyway. The following morning, August 17th, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, a gamekeeper named Keith Pryor was walking near RAF Lakenheath in Suffolk with two friends. He had noticed an unusual and unpleasant smell in that area several days earlier. He had gone back to look into it. He found the bodies of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman lying side by side in a 5-foot-deep irrigation ditch near a pheasant pen close to the perimeter fence of the base. The two girls were more than 10 miles from the town where they had grown up and where their families were still waiting for them. Later that same day, August 17, 2002, Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr were arrested on suspicion of murder. The investigation that followed confirmed what investigators had begun to suspect. Police found the charred remains of the girls' Manchester United shirts and their shoes in the waste bin at Soham Village College. Hair and fibre evidence found in Huntley's home and in his car matched the girls'. The car pedals carried brick dust and concrete particles that matched the specific surface of the road leading to the ditch where the bodies had been dumped. Cell phone analysis confirmed that Jessica's mobile phone had gone dead in the area of Huntley's home on the evening of August 4th. The location where the bodies were found was in an area Huntley was known to have visited before, and it was close to his father's house. Despite his attempts to clean the house, the car, and destroy what he could, fragments of connection remained everywhere. Huntley was sent to Rampton Secure Hospital for a mental health assessment to determine whether he was fit to stand trial. A consultant psychiatrist named Christopher Clark examined him and concluded that while Huntley showed traits of psychopathy, he did not have any major mental illness. Clark stated that Huntley had been both physically and mentally sound at the time of the murders and was mentally competent to stand trial. While on remand in prison on June 9, 2003, Huntley swallowed 29 antidepressants he had been saving in his cell. Prison staff feared he might die. He survived and was returned to his cell within 48 hours. The trial of Ian Huntley opened at the Old Bailey in London on November 5, 2003. Judge Alan Moses presided. The prosecutor was Richard Latham. Huntley was charged with 2 counts of murder. He entered a plea of not guilty. The trial ran for weeks. 3 weeks in, after having denied any knowledge of the murders, Huntley changed his account. He admitted through his defense that the girls had died in his home. He claimed both deaths were accidents. He described the nosebleed in the bath and the accidental suffocation. The prosecution described his account as rubbish during cross-examination. The jury heard his version. They heard the forensic evidence. They heard about the burned shirts in the school bin, the fibres in the car, the brick dust on the pedals, the phone signal that went dead at his house. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict on December 17, 2003. Ian Huntley was found guilty of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman by a majority verdict. He was found guilty on both counts. The trial judge, Mr. Justice Alan Moses, addressed Huntley directly before sentencing. He told him that Holly and Jessica had been happy, intelligent, and loyal. He told him they had been much loved by their families and by all who knew them. He told Huntley, "You murdered them both. You are the one person who knows how you murdered them. You are the one person who knows why. You destroyed the evidence, which showed no mercy and no regret." Huntley was sentenced to 2 life terms. A hearing in 2005 set the minimum term he would serve before being considered for parole at 40 years, making him eligible to apply for release in 2042 when he would be 68 years old. The judge who set that minimum term said the sentence left Huntley with very little hope of release. Maxine Carr was found not guilty of assisting an offender, but guilty of conspiring to pervert the course of justice for lying to police and providing Huntley with a false alibi. She received a sentence of 3.5 years. She had spent 16 months on remand before the trial and was released in May 2004. She was given a new identity and has lived under court protection ever since. In February 2005, the High Court granted her an indefinite order protecting that new identity on the grounds that her life would be in danger if it became known. After the conviction, information about Huntley's past became public. Between 1995 and 1999, there had been 10 separate occasions on which his behaviour had been reported to Humberside police. There had been 4 accusations of sexual contact with underage girls between 13 and 15 years old. There had been 3 rape allegations. There had been 1 allegation of indecent assault against an 11-year-old girl. None of those cases had resulted in a conviction. Records relating to some of them had been deleted during a record-clearing process carried out by civilian staff at Humberside Police in 2000. The records that had survived had never been shared with other police forces. When Huntley applied for his caretaker job at Soham Village College in 2001, using the name Ian Nixon and disclosing on the application form that he was also known as Ian Huntley, no proper background check was carried out under either name. The principal of the school later admitted he had not checked Huntley's references. A public inquiry chaired by Sir Michael Bichard opened in January 2004 to examine how all of this had been allowed to happen. The inquiry found that the record-keeping systems at Humberside Police were fundamentally flawed. It found that data sharing between forces had failed completely. It found that the vetting procedures that should have stopped Huntley from ever working in a school had not been followed. The chief of Humberside Police was suspended following the inquiry's findings. That suspension was later overturned and he retired in 2005. The chief constable of Cambridgeshire Police was also severely criticised for his force's failure to check Huntley's background properly, while he was claiming to be the last person to have seen 2 missing children alive. The Bichard inquiry led directly to the creation of the Police National Database, launched in 2011, which combined intelligence from 43 police forces across England and Wales and more than 150 separate computer systems, so that the kind of information fragmentation that had allowed Huntley to operate across different counties without detection could never happen again. Ian Huntley spent the following years in and out of medical units. In 2005, he was scalded with boiling water by another inmate at HMP Wakefield. In 2010, he was slashed across the throat with a sharpened object by an inmate at HMP Frankland, leaving a 7-inch scar. In 2026, at the age of 52, Huntley was found in a pool of blood in a workshop at HMP Frankland. He had been attacked with a metal pole. He was taken to the Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle and placed on life support. He died on March 7, 2026, from his injuries, without ever having faced a parole hearing. A suspect, a male prisoner in his 40s, was identified by Durham Constabulary following the attack. Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman were buried in adjacent graves in Fordham Road Cemetery in Soham. Their funerals were held on consecutive days in September 2002 at St Andrew's Parish Church. At the family's request, the media did not report on either service. The girls, who had been best friends since the age of 4, were buried a few feet apart. The person who had last seen them alive, and who had spent 2 weeks standing in front of television cameras describing the shock and despair of a community mourning their disappearance, had known exactly where they were the entire time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 5 moves to a mother who went further still. She did not insert herself into a search or position herself as a witness. She sat in front of national television cameras for 9 straight days, wept for the country, named a person she said had taken her children, and described watching them scream from the back seat of a car as a stranger drove them away. Her children were already dead when she said it. She had killed them herself. Level 5. The crying mother Susan Smith. The mother who sobbed on national television for 9 days, pleading for her missing sons while they were already dead at the bottom of a lake, Susan Lee Vaughan, was born on September 26, 1971, in Union, South Carolina, a small mill town of around 10,000 people in the northwestern part of the state. She was the youngest of 3 children and the only girl. Her childhood was marked by things that should never happen to a child. Her parents fought constantly and eventually divorced. Even after the marriage ended, the house remained violent. Her father, Harry, made repeated threats to take his own life and to hurt her mother. In January 1978, when Susan was 6 years old, her father followed through. He died by suicide. Susan was left to carry that loss at an age when most children are just learning to read. Her mother, Linda, eventually remarried a man named Beverly Russell, a local businessman who had connections with South Carolina's Republican Party and the Christian Coalition. He presented himself to the community as a man of standing and faith. He was also, by his own later admission, sexually abusing Susan throughout her teenage years. The abuse went on for years. When Susan eventually disclosed it, her family did not press charges against Russell. He was too well connected. He was too important. Susan was left to carry that as well. She attempted suicide at the age of 13. After graduating from high school in 1989, she attempted it again, following the end of a relationship with a married man who had cut off their affair. She was 19 years old when she married David Smith in 1991. She was 2 months pregnant at the time of the wedding. Their son Michael Daniel Smith was born that same year. Their second son, Alexander Tyler Smith, known as Alex, was born in 1993. David was 20 years old when they married, and Susan was 19. Both of them came from families that had been torn apart by violence and grief, and they had brought those wounds into a marriage neither of them was equipped for. They fought constantly. They cheated on each other repeatedly. People who knew them described a relationship that lurched between reconciliation and blow-ups, with neither of them ever fully stable. By the time Alex was born in 1993, Susan had begun an affair with a man named Tom Findley, the 27-year-old son of Jay. Carrie Findley, the owner of Conso Products, the largest employer in Union. Tom was considered one of the most eligible men in town. He was from money, he was from a good family, and Susan believed being with him would give her the kind of life and security she had spent her whole life without. She and David officially divorced in May 1994. Susan and Tom had stopped seeing each other for a period, but resumed the relationship in September 1994 when Susan told Tom she was going through with the divorce. Then Tom wrote her a letter. The letter was dated October 17, 1994, and it was 2 pages long. It was formal in the way it was written, calm, and in places even kind. But its message was decisive. Tom told Susan she would make a good wife for someone. He told her she had a lot of good qualities, but he was clear that the person she made a good wife for was not going to be him. He pointed directly to her children as the problem. He wrote that there were things about her that were not suited for him. And yes, he was talking about her children. He wrote that he was sure her kids were good kids, but that it would not matter how good they were. He did not want children, and he did not want the responsibility of someone else's 2 small boys. He also wrote that he had been bothered by her behavior at a recent party he had thrown, where she had kissed and been physically involved with another man in front of people. He told her that if she wanted to catch a nice man one day, she had to act like a nice woman. He ended with a note that she needed to make her own decisions, but remember that she would have to live with the consequences. Susan had already been approaching Tom with the idea that if she were not attached to her children, they could have a real future together. The letter removed any doubt about where he stood. She had seen Tom 3 separate times on October 24, 1994, the day of the murders, and she had been in a desperate emotional state throughout those encounters. That evening, Susan Smith strapped 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex into their car seats in the back of her 1990 red Mazda Protégé and drove away from her home in Union. In her confession, she would later write, "I dropped to the lowest when I allowed my children to go down that ramp, into the water without me." At some point during the drive, she stopped the car at the edge of a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake, a quiet body of water, a short drive outside of Union. According to investigators, 3-year-old Michael looked out at the dark water and asked his mother where they were going. She did not answer him. She shifted the car into neutral and let it roll forward toward the water. She stopped. She tried again and stopped again. On the 3rd attempt, she stepped outside, reached back in through the window, and released the brake. The car rolled down the ramp and entered the lake. Based on a reconstruction later carried out by the state, it took approximately 6 minutes for the water to fill the car and for the vehicle to sink to the bottom. Michael and Alex were still strapped into their car seats when the water reached them. The car came to rest approximately 122 feet from the shoreline, far deeper than where initial searches would focus. Susan Smith left the lake and walked to the home of a couple named the McLeods, who lived approximately a quarter-mile away. She knocked on their door just after 9 o'clock at night, in an apparent state of distress. She told them a man had taken her car and her children. She described being stopped at a red light at the intersection of Monarch Mills when a black man armed with a gun had forced his way into her car, told her to drive, then after a short distance had ordered her out and driven away with both boys still in the back seat. She asked the McLeods to call her mother. The McLeods called the police. Within hours, Union County Sheriff Howard Wells, who was also Susan's godfather, was at the scene. The investigation began. Within the first day, officers were already starting to find problems with the story Susan was telling. The traffic light at the intersection where she said she had been stopped only turned red when triggered by another car approaching from the side road. Susan had said the intersection was completely empty. That detail made the account of stopping at the light impossible to reconcile. Officers who had been working a separate assignment near that same intersection that night reported seeing nothing matching Susan's description. Despite wall-to-wall national coverage of the case and a search of car records across the country, the red Mazda had not been spotted anywhere. Divers searched nearby bodies of water, but not far enough into John D. Long Lake. The car would not be found until after the confession. Despite the growing inconsistencies in her account, Susan Smith went on television. For 9 consecutive days, beginning from the night the story broke, Susan Smith appeared in front of news cameras to plead for her children's return. She stood at press conferences with David Smith beside her. She appeared on national programs. She spoke to reporters from the steps of the Union County Sheriff's Office. Her estranged husband held press conferences and made his own pleas. He told the cameras, "Please, to the guy, to the man, me and my wife, beg you to please return our children to us safely." Yellow ribbons were tied on trees throughout Union. The Adam Walsh Foundation, an organization dedicated to finding missing children, got involved in the search. A sketch artist had worked with Susan to create a composite drawing of the carjacker, who she described as around 40 years old, black, wearing a plaid jacket and a dark hat with dark jeans. That image went up in storefront windows all across Union. Tips poured in from around the country. Officers contacted police departments in multiple states to chase down any sighting of the car or a man matching the description. Susan appeared before the cameras looking devastated. She pressed a tissue to her eyes repeatedly during interviews. She said the words any grieving mother would say. She told reporters, "Please, please bring them home." She said she could not express how much her boys were wanted back home and how much she loved them and missed them. She spoke about the carjacker and what he had told her, describing her sons crying in the back seat as the car drove away. In one of the most widely broadcast moments of those 9 days, Susan told reporters that whoever had her sons, she prayed every day that they were taking care of them. Investigators who watched these appearances closely noticed something. Agent David Caldwell of the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, who had been assigned to the case, observed that during interviews, Susan would sob and make the sounds of crying, but that tears did not always accompany those sounds. An FBI agent who administered one of Susan's polygraph tests on October 27th, just 2 days into the search, noted that she made fake sounds of crying with no tears in her eyes during the examination. Susan's polygraph results on October 27th were inconclusive. The test showed her highest level of deception in response to the question, "Do you know where your children are?" David Smith's polygraph showed he had no knowledge of what had happened to his sons. Investigators continued questioning Susan, carefully and methodically, over multiple sessions across the 9 days. They noted a series of additional problems with her account. The description she had given of the carjacker was unusually vague in some respects, and unusually specific in others. The forensic artist who created the sketch felt Susan had given him limited meaningful detail. The car had still not been found anywhere in the country despite all the resources devoted to finding it. Investigators had quietly returned again and again to search the lakes in the surrounding area, including John D. Long Lake, but they had focused their underwater searches within 30 feet of the shore, never knowing the car was sitting 122 feet out. On the morning of November 3, 1994, 9 days after Michael and Alex had disappeared, Susan Smith gave a national television interview on NBC's Today Show. She sat before the cameras and spoke about her missing children with the same anguish she had displayed for 9 straight days. Just hours after that interview was broadcast to the country, Susan Smith confessed. That afternoon, Sheriff Howard Wells sat across from Susan in a room at a local Baptist church in Union. He had constructed his approach carefully over the 9 days. He walked Susan through each inconsistency in her account, one at a time. He explained the issue with the traffic light. He told her that officers had been near that intersection that night and had seen nothing. He explained that her car had not appeared anywhere in the country. When he was finished, Susan asked if they could pray together. Wells took her hands. When the prayer ended, Wells looked at her and told her it was time. Susan dropped her head and began to cry. Then she asked him for his gun. When he asked why, she told him, "You do not understand. My children are not all right." She wrote out her confession in her own handwriting. It was signed at 5:05 in the afternoon on November 3rd, 1994. In it, she wrote, "I was in love with someone very much, but he did not love me and never would. I had a very difficult time accepting that." She wrote, "I dropped to the lowest when I allowed my children to go down that ramp into the water without me." She was arrested immediately and charged with 2 counts of murder. Sheriff Wells held a press conference that evening to inform the country. Using the location information Susan had provided, divers went into John D. Long Lake and located the Mazda 122 feet from the shoreline. They brought it up to the surface. Michael and Alex were still strapped into their car seats, exactly as they had been 9 days earlier, on the night their mother had driven to the edge of the water and released the brake. Also found in the car were Susan's wedding album, her wedding dress, and Tom Findley's letter ending the relationship, and telling her that her children were the reason it could not continue. The lead prosecutor on the case was Tommy Pope. He later told journalists that when the car was pulled from the lake and he saw those 2 boys in their car seats, he watched men and women in law enforcement cry at what they were looking at. He said the betrayal of the entire country that had searched and hoped and prayed alongside Susan Smith was worse than if a carjacker had actually existed. He said people had been so drawn in and so drawn to Susan that the discovery of what she had actually done was harder to absorb than the original crime itself. Susan's false description of the carjacker as a black man had sent a wave of racial tension through Union and through the country. A composite drawing based on her description had been circulated nationally. Communities had been placed on alert. Innocent men who matched elements of that description had faced police contact. After the confession, Susan's own family publicly apologized to the black community of Union. Tommy Pope, reflecting on it years later, said it still haunted him to think about what might have happened if Susan had named a specific person instead of giving a vague description. Susan Smith's trial opened on July 18, 1995, in Union, South Carolina. Judge William Howard presided. The prosecutor was Tommy Pope. Susan's defense attorneys were David Bruck and Judy Clark. The defense argued that Susan had driven to the lake that night intending to take her own life along with her children, that her body had instinctively exited the car, and that the crime had been an act of a person in a state of complete mental collapse rather than a deliberate murder. The defense pointed to Susan's history, the suicide of her father, the years of abuse at the hands of her stepfather, and the series of emotional crises that had preceded October 25. Tom Findley took the stand and testified about the letter he had written. Prosecutor Pope read the letter to the jury. Its key passage told Susan that there were things about her that were not suited for him, and that yes, he was talking about her children. Findley testified that in the final days before the murders, he had been genuinely concerned Susan was thinking about ending her life. He said it was clear to him she had been suicidal. He described her as caring, loving, and a good friend, but said the relationship was over. During the closing arguments, Pope told the jury that on the night of October 25th, Susan Smith had made a choice. He told them she had chosen the love of a man over the love of her 2 boys. He described releasing the car brake as equivalent to pulling a trigger. He told the jury that the 2 children in those car seats had been screaming and calling for their father while Susan ran up the hill from the water's edge. The jury took 2.5 hours to reach a verdict. On July 22, 1995, Susan Smith was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. During the penalty phase, which would decide whether Smith lived or died, Beverly Russell, the stepfather who had abused her for years, took the stand. He wept as he read from a letter he had written to Susan while she was in jail. He told the jury he wanted her to know she did not carry all the guilt for this tragedy and that his heart broke for what he had done to her. The jury decided that Susan's background had shaped what happened and voted against the death penalty. On July 28, 1995, Susan Smith was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. She was eligible for her first parole hearing on November 20, 2024. David Smith appeared at that hearing and told the board that 30 years was simply not enough. He told the board that what Susan had done had almost cost him his own life from grief. 14 other witnesses appeared to oppose her release. The parole board voted unanimously to deny her parole. Susan Smith closed her eyes after the decision was read. Michael and Alex Smith were buried together in a single casket at Bogensville United Methodist Church in Union, South Carolina. Their funeral took place on November 6, 1994. Hundreds of mourners attended. Michael was 3 years old. Alex was 14 months old. They were placed in the ground together, in the same coffin, 9 days after the last time their mother had spoken to them at the edge of the water. People still leave toys at their grave. Michael would be 33 years old today. Alex would be 31. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 6 takes the performance in a completely different direction. The next man never broke down on camera, never wept for missing children, never begged for anyone to come home. He stood at press conferences in a suit, spoke in measured sentences, held himself with the steady calm of a man who had nothing to hide, and told the cameras and the reporters exactly what a grieving husband would say, while investigators all around him were building a case that would eventually send him to death row. Level 6, the press conference, killer Fotis Dulos, the man who held press conferences proclaiming his innocence while investigators were finding his dead wife's blood in garbage bags across Hartford. Jennifer Farber was born on September 27, 1968, in New York City. Her family had money and standing. Her father, Hilliard Farber, had founded his own brokerage after running the bond trading desk at Chase Manhattan Bank. Her maternal uncle and aunt by marriage were the founders of the fashion company Liz Claiborne. Jennifer grew up comfortable and educated. She attended Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, where she graduated in 1990. She went on to earn a master's degree in writing from New York University. She was smart, warm, and had a genuine love of language and storytelling. She ran her own blog and contributed writing to Patch.com. She was, by all accounts from the people who knew her, a dedicated and deeply loving mother. She was also, by the time she disappeared on May 24, 2019, a woman who had written in legal documents that she was afraid of her husband and that filing for divorce from him would make him furious and cause him to retaliate against her. Fotis Dulos was born in Greece. He came to the United States, also attended Brown University, and built a career as a luxury home builder in Connecticut. He founded a company called 4 Group Inc., which developed high-end properties in the Farmington area. He and Jennifer had met at Brown through mutual social connections and eventually married in 2004. They settled in Farmington, Connecticut, where Fotis ran his business and built what appeared from the outside to be an impressive life. They had 5 children together, including 2 sets of twins. All 5 children were named after Greek Orthodox saints. Their names were Petros, Theodore, Constantine, Christian, and Cleopatra Noel. The children ranged in age from 8 to 13 at the time Jennifer disappeared. Beneath the surface of this life, things had been falling apart for years. Jennifer wrote in a 2012 blog post about feeling afraid and weak and reluctant to confront the man she had married. Friends later said the marriage had been difficult long before it reached its formal end. Fotis had begun taking trips with a colleague named Michelle Troconis, a woman originally from Venezuela who had previously hosted a snow sports show for ESPN South America. Fotis told Jennifer those trips were for business. They were not. By 2017, he admitted to Jennifer that he and Troconis had been having an affair. In June 2017, Jennifer filed for divorce at Superior Court in Stamford, Connecticut. She moved out of their large home in Farmington with the 5 children and rented a house in New Canaan, approximately 70 miles away. Michelle Troconis moved into the Farmington home with her own daughter from a previous relationship. The divorce proceedings became one of the most bitter and complicated in Connecticut's legal history. Over the course of the proceedings, the 2 sides filed more than 300 legal motions. Jennifer alleged that Fotis had threatened to kidnap their children if she did not agree to his terms. She alleged he had purchased a gun that year. She stated in filings that she was frightened of him and that she knew filing those documents would make him angry and that he would try to harm her in some way. A judge awarded Jennifer sole physical custody of the 5 children, while both parents shared joint legal custody. Fotis was limited to supervised visits and monitored phone calls with his children. Jennifer's mother, Gloria Farber, filed a separate lawsuit against Fotis, alleging he owed approximately $1.7 million that her late husband Hilliard had loaned him. By the time Jennifer disappeared, investigators would later determine that Fotis was carrying approximately $7 million in debt. He would also have been able to access portions of his children's trust funds if Jennifer died. On the morning of May 24, 2019, Jennifer Dulos dropped her 5 children off at New Canaan Country School, their private school, at approximately 8 o'clock in the morning. A neighbor's security camera captured her returning to her home at 8:05. That footage was the last confirmed sighting of Jennifer Dulos alive. When her friends realized she had missed multiple appointments and gone 10 hours without any communication, they reported her missing. Police went to her home on Wells Lane in New Canaan and found what investigators later described as evidence of a violent attack in her garage. There was blood. There were signs that someone had attempted to clean the garage. There was a bloody shoe print on the garage floor. Jennifer's Chevrolet Suburban was found abandoned at Waveney Park, a public park roughly 3 miles from her home. The vehicle had been left in a way that suggested, according to police, that whoever left it had departed in a hurry. When investigators examined the SUV, the gear had been shifted to neutral or reverse. Jennifer's body was never found. That same evening, May 24, 2019, surveillance cameras in Hartford, Connecticut, approximately 50 miles north of New Canaan, captured footage of a black Ford Raptor pickup truck making 30 stops along a 4-mile stretch of road. The man in the footage was seen leaning out of the truck and placing garbage bags into trash bins at each stop. A woman in the vehicle was also seen on camera at certain moments. Police recovered many of those garbage bags. Inside them were items of clothing belonging to Jennifer Dulos. There were plastic zip ties that tested positive for her blood. There were sponges and other items stained with her blood. Fotis Dulos owned a black Ford Raptor. Cell phone records placed him in Hartford that evening. Investigators also determined that Jennifer's DNA was found mixed with Fotis's DNA on the kitchen faucet inside her home on Wells Lane. That single piece of evidence placed Fotis physically in the house where the violent attack had occurred. Handwritten notes were later found at his company offices. Investigators described them as alibi scripts, detailed written accounts of exactly where Fotis and Troconis had been on May 24th and May 25th, broken down with specific times and activities. Troconis told investigators the notes had been written to help them remember what they had done. Police stated publicly that there was more evidence that had not yet been made public. Fotis Dulos and Michelle Troconis were arrested on June 1, 2019, at a hotel in Avon, Connecticut. They were charged with evidence tampering and hindering prosecution. They both pleaded not guilty. Fotis posted bail and was released. He then gave television interviews. In early July 2019, Fotis Dulos sat down with a journalist from NBC New York named Sarah Wallace for a sit-down interview. He told her he was worried about Jennifer. He said it had been a very tough time for the whole family and that they were all worried about her. He told Wallace he was worried very much about the children and what they were going through. When Wallace asked him directly whether he had any part in Jennifer's disappearance, he said he did not, but that he would like to leave it at that, on the advice of his lawyer. When asked whether he believed Jennifer was alive, he said he did. He maintained throughout the interview that he knew what he had done and what he had not done. He said he had to stand and fight and hope that the truth would come out. He said he had his differences with Jennifer, the way many people do when a marriage falls apart, but that did not mean he wished her any harm. He sat in front of the camera and said this while investigators were still testing the garbage bags his DNA had helped fill. In September 2019, both Fotis and Troconis were arrested again, this time for additional evidence tampering charges. Both pleaded not guilty again. Fotis posted bond again and was released again. He gave another interview, this one recorded by NBC Dateline. He repeated the same positions. He was calm, he was measured, he was consistent. He said he had faith in the legal system. He urged people who had been following the case to be patient and wait for all the facts to emerge before judging him. He said he thought it was ludicrous that people believed he had wanted Jennifer out of the way. He said it was heartbreaking that he had not been able to see his children since she disappeared. His lawyer during this period was Norman Pattis, who had previously represented conspiracy theorist Alex Jones in civil cases. Pattis acknowledged publicly that his client's behavior surrounding the disposal of bags was deeply troubling and required explanation. He said that he and Fotis understood why Fotis was in such serious legal trouble. Despite this, Pattis argued his client's innocence and attacked the evidence as circumstantial. In late October 2019, Troconis moved out of Fotis's home in Farmington with her daughter. Around the same time, investigators found that one of Fotis's employees, a man named Andrew Gumieni, had swapped the seats out of a Porsche Cayenne belonging to Fotis, placing them into a red Toyota Tacoma at Fotis's instruction. Gumieni had been told to sell the Tacoma seats or swap them out. He had chosen to keep the original seats instead, without telling Fotis. DNA testing confirmed that blood found on one of those original passenger seats belonged to Jennifer Doulos. On January 7, 2020, Connecticut State Police arrested Fotis Doulos again. This time the charges were capital murder, and kidnapping. He was taken into custody and bail was set. Troconis was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. An attorney named Kent Mohwini, who was a friend of Fotis, was also charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Police alleged that Mohwini had been part of the planning. Fotis Doulos posted bail. He was due to appear at an emergency bail hearing on January 28, 2020. He did not appear. Police went to his home in Farmington and found him sitting in his own car inside his garage. He had run a vacuum cleaner hose from the exhaust pipe of his SUV into the interior of the vehicle. Emergency responders performed CPR and found a faint pulse. He was transported to Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx, New York, where doctors administered hyperbaric oxygen therapy. His 5 children came to the hospital to see him before he was taken off life support. He was pronounced dead 2 days later. Fotis Doulos was 52 years old when he died. A note was found in his car. His attorney told reporters it was a handwritten note on a single sheet of notebook-sized paper in blue ink. In it, Fotis wrote that he refused to spend even an hour more in jail for something he had nothing to do with. He stated that Michelle Troconis had nothing to do with Jennifer's disappearance. His attorney filed a motion asking the court to continue the prosecution of Fotis as an estate so that the evidence could be fully tested in a trial. The court declined. Because Fotis died before trial, he was never convicted of anything. Under the law, he died as a man who had been charged but not found guilty. Jennifer's body has never been found. In October 2023, a Connecticut probate court judge declared Jennifer Doulos legally dead based on the available evidence. The state's chief medical examiner stated her likely cause of death involved traumatic blunt force injuries. Michelle Troconis went to trial in early 2024. The trial lasted approximately a month. Prosecutors presented surveillance footage, DNA evidence, cell phone records, and 3 separate police interviews with Troconis herself. The jury was shown the footage of the trash bags being disposed of in Hartford. They heard about the alibi scripts found at Fotis's offices. They heard about Troconis wiping her hand on the ground during the disposal of the bags while standing at the side of the pickup, which prosecutors argued was not wiping off gum but handling the evidence. On March 1, 2024, the jury found Michelle Troconis guilty on all 6 counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. She dropped into her chair and put her head down on the table when the final verdict was read. At the sentencing hearing on May 31, 2024, Jennifer's children took the stand one by one. Theodore Doulos, who had been 13 years old when his mother disappeared, told the court he no longer had his mother, his hero. He said he would never talk to her again, never ask her for advice again. He said she would never see him graduate high school, she would never see him graduate university, she would never see him get married. He told the court those things were true for all 5 of his siblings as well. He told Troconis that until she gave them answers about where his mother's remains were, she would be considered evil and a coward. He told the judge that an appropriate sentence would be 50 years, 10 years for each child who had lost their mother that day. Gloria Farber, Jennifer's mother, also delivered a statement to the court. Judge Kevin Randolph sentenced Michelle Troconis to a 20-year prison term, suspended after 14.5 years, followed by 5 years of probation. She was taken immediately into custody. Her attorney announced they intended to appeal. Kent Mohwini received 11 months in prison. Jennifer Faber-Dulos was 50 years old when she was last seen alive. She was dropping her children off at school. She had written to a court that she was afraid of what her husband would do when she filed for divorce. She had been awarded sole physical custody of her children. She had been building a life away from the man she had left. Her children's trust funds existed to protect their futures. Her body has never been returned to her family. Her son Theodore stood in a courtroom at 19 years old and said he could not bury his mother next to her father. Fotis Doulos gave 2 television interviews in the months after Jennifer disappeared. He looked into cameras and said he was worried about his wife and hoped the truth would come out. The note he left when he died declared his innocence in blue ink on a sheet of notebook paper. Jennifer has still not been found. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Level 7 moves to the final case on this list, and the one that separates itself from every case that came before it in a way that is almost impossible to fully absorb. The last man did not give press conference interviews or sit down with journalists. He used a phone call, a live phone call that his victim answered expecting to hear her daughter's voices, and he made her listen to what he was doing to them in real time while a camera crew that had no idea what they were watching filmed him standing in front of his house the very next day. Level 7. The phone call killer. John Battaglia, the father who used a phone call to make his ex-wife listen to her daughters die. John David Battaglia Jr. was born on August 2, 1955, on a military base in Enterprise, Alabama. His father was in the military, and the family moved frequently during his childhood, including a period in Germany. His father eventually left the military in 1970. Battaglia attended high school in New Jersey, graduating from Dumont High School. He enrolled at Fairleigh Dickinson University as an accounting major, initially as a pre-med student before switching, and then dropped out in 1976. He got into trouble with the law over drug use, and then joined the United States Marines, where he reached the rank of sergeant. After leaving the Marines, he became a certified public accountant and built a successful career in Dallas, Texas. He lived in Highland Park, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the Dallas area. By the time the events of May 2, 2001 unfolded, he was 45 years old, professionally established, and had been known to the courts as a violent man for more than a decade. Before he married Mary Jean Pearl, Battaglia had been married once before, to a woman named Michelle Getty. That marriage had also been marked by violence. He assaulted Getty on multiple occasions. Once, he attacked her outside the school their daughter Christy attended. On a separate occasion, he broke her nose. On another, in direct response to her filing a request for his arrest, he attacked her at a bus stop, beating her until she lost consciousness, breaking her nose again, and dislocating her jaw. She was admitted to hospital. In 1987, he pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge from that marriage and was given 2 years of probation. Having a history of violence against his first wife and a conviction for it did not prevent him from marrying again. Mary Jean Pearl lived in Highland Park, Texas. They married on April 6, 1991. Their first daughter, Mary Faith Battaglia, was born in 1992. Their second daughter, Liberty May Battaglia, was born in 1995. Both girls attended John S. Bradfield Elementary School in Highland Park. People who knew Battaglia said he genuinely doted on the girls. He called them his best little friends. He kept photographs of them. Mary Jean later stated that until the day he killed them, she had not believed he was willing to physically harm his daughters, even with everything she knew about what he had done to the adult women in his life. The marriage to Mary Jean had been, by her own later account, 9 years of verbal abuse that at times became physical. In January 1999, Mary Jean separated from him, and he was no longer permitted to live in the family home. On Christmas morning of 1999, Battaglia arrived at Mary Jean's house to take Faith and Liberty to church. His older daughter, Christy, from his first marriage, was with him. When he and Mary Jean argued, he attacked her in front of all 3 children. He pounded on her, pulled her hair, pushed her to the floor, and kicked her repeatedly, while Faith and Liberty stood there crying and begging him to stop. He left. Mary Jean called 911. She had bruises on both sides of her head, a bruise on her arm, a bruise on her finger, a bruise on her shin, and a puncture wound in her heel. He pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor assault charge for the Christmas 1999 attack. He was sentenced to 2 years of probation. As part of the protective order issued at the time of their divorce, which became final in August 2000, Battaglia was prohibited from stalking, threatening, or harassing Mary Jean or the girls. He was also prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm. Despite the Christmas assault and the conviction, and despite the protective order that came with it, Battaglia was still permitted to have unsupervised visits with Faith and Liberty. Around Easter of 2001, Mary Jean received a voicemail message from Battaglia. In it, he swore at her repeatedly and called her names. He brought up her legal actions against him with obvious rage. The message was a violation of the terms of his probation. Mary Jean reported it to his probation officer. A warrant was issued for his arrest for violating probation. On May 2, 2001, a police officer contacted Battaglia and told him he needed to make arrangements to turn himself in on the outstanding warrant. That same evening, Battaglia had a scheduled dinner visit with Faith and Liberty. Mary Jean drove the girls to a parking lot at Highland Park Village and watched Battaglia pick them up from there. He had told them he was taking them to dinner at the mall. She watched until she could see the girls were safely in his vehicle, then drove to her friend Melissa's house to spend the evening. Battaglia did not take the girls to the mall. He drove them to his apartment at the Adam Hatts Lofts in the Deep Ellum neighborhood of Dallas. At Melissa's house, Mary Jean received a message that the girls had called and wanted to ask her something. She called Battaglia's number. He answered and put the phone on speaker. He turned to 9-year-old Faith and told her to ask her mother the question he wanted asked. Faith asked, "Mummy, why do you want Daddy to go to jail?" Mary Jean began to respond. She tried to speak directly to Battaglia. Then she heard her daughter's voice change completely. Faith said, "No, Daddy, please don't. Don't do it." Mary Jean screamed into the phone. "Run! Run for the door!" She heard gunshots. She heard her daughter's scream. Then she heard Battaglia's voice. He said the words Merry and Christmas, with a profanity placed between them. The reference was deliberate. It was a direct reference to the Christmas 1999 assault for which Mary Jean had reported him, the one that had put him on probation, the one that had led to the warrant that was now outstanding against him. More gunshots. Mary Jean hung up and called 911. She drove to Battaglia's apartment. Inside the apartment, investigators found both girls. Faith, who was 9 years old, had been shot 3 times. One shot had entered her back, severing her spinal cord and rupturing the large blood vessel that runs from the heart. A second shot was fired at contact range against the back of her head and exited through her forehead. A third shot struck her shoulder. Liberty, who was 6 years old, had been shot 4 times. One shot entered her back, severed her spinal cord, passed through a lung, and lodged in her chest. A contact shot to her head passed through her brain and exited her face. The medical examiner later testified that Liberty had lost approximately 30% of her blood, which meant her heart had still been beating after the first shot struck her spine, and that she may have been conscious in the time between when her spinal cord was severed and when she was shot in the head. 16 firearms were recovered from Battaglia's apartment. A fully loaded revolver was found in his truck outside. After shooting his daughters, Battaglia did not call 911. He did not call Mary Jean to tell her what he had done. He left the apartment and went to a bar with his girlfriend. He then drove to a tattoo parlor and had 2 large red roses tattooed on his left arm, one representing each daughter. When police arrived at the tattoo parlor to arrest him, he fought back physically. It took 4 officers to subdue him. He had a black eye when he was photographed after his arrest. Before leaving the apartment that night, Battaglia had called Mary Jean's answering machine and left a message addressed to the girls. The recording was found the following day. In the message, he said, "Good night, my little babies. I hope you are resting in a different place. I love you. I wish you had nothing to do with your mother. She was evil, vicious, stupid. You will be free of her. I love you very dearly. You were very brave girls, very brave. Liberty, you were oh so brave. I love you so much." He also called the voicemail of Michelle Getty, his first ex-wife, that same night. He left her a message telling her to invest wisely the college money he had set aside for their daughter Christy. The funeral for Faith and Liberty was held at Our Redeemer Lutheran Church in North Dallas. They were buried at Hillcrest Cemetery in North Dallas. Texas prosecutors stated publicly that Battaglia killed his daughters as a direct act of retaliation because Mary Jean had complained to his probation officer. The warrant for his arrest had been issued that same day. His motive was not freedom. His motive was not money. His motive was not a new life or a new relationship. The warrant existed because of Mary Jean. He could not reach Mary Jean. He could not hurt Mary Jean the way he wanted to. So he used the two people she loved most in the world, and he made her listen. Battaglia's capital murder trial began on April 22, 2002. The prosecution was led by Howard Blackman. The defense was led by Paul Johnson and Paul Brauchel. The defense acknowledged that Battaglia had committed the murders and argued that he should not receive the death penalty because he suffered from a serious mental health condition and was not in his right mind. Prosecutors argued the murders were cold, deliberate acts of retaliation with a clear and direct motive. The jury deliberated for 19 minutes before returning a guilty verdict on capital murder. The sentence handed down was death. The years that followed involved a long series of legal battles over whether Battaglia was mentally competent to be executed. His lawyers argued repeatedly that he suffered from delusions that prevented him from having a clear understanding of why he was going to be executed, which under United States law is required before a death sentence can be carried out. They argued he believed his situation was the result of a vast conspiracy involving his ex-wives, his former lawyers, the prosecutors, the judge who presided over his trial, the jury, and the Ku Klux Klan. They also presented evidence that he claimed to have no memory of the murders at all. Courts examined these claims closely. A state judge and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals both described Battaglia as highly intelligent, not mentally ill, and faking his apparent delusions to avoid being executed. Evidence presented at a hearing showed that Battaglia had used the prison library to research legal cases on what level of understanding was required before a person on death row could be put to death. He was also recorded in a phone call with his father from prison in which he referred to the situation as a chess game that he was trying to win. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals issued a 78-page decision in September 2017, upholding the conclusion that he was competent and was deliberately pretending to be delusional. Multiple scheduled execution dates were set and delayed by court orders over the years. On the morning of February 1, 2018, his lawyers filed a new appeal, arguing that the drugs Texas planned to use were old and had caused suffering in recent executions. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected that appeal. The United States Supreme Court issued its final denial of all remaining appeals at approximately 9 o'clock that evening. At 9:18 in the evening on February 1, 2018, the lethal injection was administered at the Huntsville unit in Texas. John David Battaglia was 62 years old. Mary Jean Pearl was present in the witness area, separated from the execution chamber by a glass window. Battaglia had been described by prison officials as jovial in the hours leading up to the execution. When the witnesses were brought into the viewing area, Battaglia looked around the room until he spotted Mary Jean. When the warden asked if he had any last words, Battaglia said no. Then he changed his mind. He looked at Mary Jean Pearl and said, "Well, hi, Mary Jean. See you all later." He told the officials to go ahead. After the injection was administered, Battaglia opened his eyes and lifted his head. He asked, "Am I still alive?" Then he said he could feel it. He gasped twice. Within seconds, all movement stopped. He was pronounced dead at 9:40 in the evening, 22 minutes after the injection began. Mary Jean turned away from the viewing window. She walked to the back of the witness area and said, "I have seen enough of him." She returned a few minutes later and watched as a physician examined him and confirmed he had no vital signs. She declined to give any interviews afterward. As a direct result of the murders of Faith and Liberty, the Texas Senate unanimously passed a piece of legislation called Senate Bill 140. It was signed into law by Governor Rick Perry and took effect on September 1, 2001. The law changed how Texas family courts handled custody and visitation cases where a parent had a documented history of domestic violence. A supervised visitation center called Hannah's House was established as a direct result of the case. A second center, called Faith and Liberty's Place, was later opened by the Dallas domestic abuse shelter called the Family Place, in the memory of both girls. It provides a safe place for children to visit parents under supervision. with law enforcement nearby. The Dallas County Family Court judge who had previously dismissed an assault charge against Battaglia resigned his position in the year following the killings. He ran against the sitting Dallas County District Attorney in the next election. Mary Jean Pearl campaigned actively against him, arguing that his decision to dismiss the earlier charge had allowed Battaglia to remain out of prison and retain access to his daughters. In 2014, while on death row, Battaglia gave an interview to the Dallas Morning News. He told the reporter that faith and liberty had been his best little friends. He said he kept photographs of them in his prison cell. When asked what he remembered about what he had done, he said, "I do not feel like I killed them. I am a little bit in the blank about what happened." Faith was 9 years old, Liberty was 6. Their mother drove them to a parking lot on the evening of May 2, 2001, and watched until she could see they were safely in their father's car before she drove away. The 6 cases that came before this one each had something their perpetrator wanted from what came next. A new relationship, a financial obstacle removed, a fresh start somewhere else. Freedom from a marriage, insurance money, years of power over another person. Each of those men or women wanted something that required the victim to be gone. John Battaglia wanted nothing that came next. What he did on May 2, 2001, was aimed entirely at the past, at a warrant with his name on it, at a woman who had put it there. The phone call was the weapon, the speakerphone was how he aimed it, and the words he said when it was over were not for his daughters, they were for her. Mary Jean Pearl has carried May 2, 2001 with her every day since. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.